Welcome to the Organizational Transformation Kung Fu Podcast with your hosts, Sandi Verrecchia and Jennifer Long.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Organizational Transformation Kung Fu, OT Kung Fu as we like to call it. I am your host, Jennifer Long from Own Up in Denver, Colorado, where it's been exceedingly hot, and am very happy that it's cooling off just a wee bit. I am here with my lovely co-host, Sandi Verrecchia from Satori Consulting in Toronto, Canada. Hello, Sandi.
Hello. We have not had the heat that you've had. We've had just tremendous amounts of rain. So it's been a crazy summer, I think, everywhere. Everything's a bit weird.
It is all a bit weird, but that's okay because we're okay with things changing, aren't we, Sandi?
We are, yes.
We are.
Change is inevitable, always around us.
That's right. It's happening all the time. And so on that note, we're excited because we are going to spend this episode having a conversation about change and how it's really about opportunity. And I will let Sandi introduce the guest that we have and who we're talking to today to talk about change.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jen. So today I'm really happy to introduce Curtis Bateman, who's the best-selling co-author of a book called Change, How to Turn Uncertainty into Opportunity. I have the book right here. I had the pleasure of reading it. Curtis is the Vice President of Direct International Offices for FranklinCovey, with over 24 years of experience in the training industry. He's an internationally recognized presenter, content developer, change consultant, business leader, and coach. I thought this was interesting. Formerly, he was the president and CEO of Red Tree Leadership, where he managed the brand of Who Moved My Cheese, which I know everybody has read that book at some point in their lives.
Everybody. That's right.
Everybody. I mean, every new manager is handed that book as a bit of a playbook. So it was awesome. So that was pretty cool.
Yes.
And I think he presently manages pretty much the world for FranklinCovey. I couldn't list all of the countries that you looked after. So welcome, Curtis, to the Organizational Transformation Kung Fu Podcast. So I have to say, first off, I really love the structure of your book. It was different from other books that I've read, and although there's a story component, it wasn't all in story. I love the fact that you start off with a parable and around change, and you weaved it throughout the book. And then you pulled everything together in every chapter with the captain's corner. So I thought it was just an excellent read. So thank you for that.
Oh, I'm so glad you recognize that. We actually changed the structure of the book 3 different times. It went through 3 rewrites, and that was on purpose. So I'm glad you noticed that. That's rewarding to hear that.
Excellent. Good.
It's good.
All right,
I'm glad that we can go from Who Moved My Cheese to Who Rocked My Boat.
Yes.
I know. You know what? I worked with Spencer, Dr. Johnson, the guy that wrote Who Moved My Cheese, and lots of other parables for so many years. One of the first rewrites, we didn't have a parable in it, and I thought, this is a mistake. I spent so much time with this guy. It would be a mistake not to try and insert a parable. So I learned a lot from him. Great individual.
Right. And so for people who are listening, the book starts with a parable, and it's a great illustration of what the whole book is about. And maybe starting with the first thing I was fascinated with is the people who are on the boat and how they're named.
The characters.
And maybe you could talk a little bit about the behaviors.
Yeah. So in all of my work with organizations and leaders and individuals, you sit and you watch, how do people react when the change gets introduced? And over time, it became really clear. There are hundreds of reactions, but there are these 5 common reactions. And we've named them in a way that hopefully doesn't make them bad or good. It just identifies that there's a reaction taking place. And the idea to make them the crew on the boat was just a fun idea. So in a changing situation, we've identified move, minimize, wait, resist, quit, and quits. And they each have a really important role that they play. They represent human behavior, human reaction, and the goal in all of that is not to judge their behavior as right or wrong, but just to acknowledge that, hey, this happens. And in one change, Curtis, me, I might respond with move. I'm super excited about it. But on the next change where it may feel less good to me, I might react as resist. So I won't even be the same reaction from change to change. And it's just a fun way to talk about it. It starts to give people a language to talk about it that doesn't feel like I'm accusing Jen or Sandi of doing or being something. It just says, hey, there's a lot of move going on right now, or something that feels far less threatening, and it diffuses some of the energy and gives us a much healthier way to talk about how we're reacting to change inside a team or just as we reflect ourselves. So it is fun, and I love the 5 of them. You might come up with other crazy ones as you read it. There might be burn the house down or other kinds of reactions that we may not want to include. But these 5 show up really consistently in the changes that I've seen with organizations, just really consistently over and over.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing there is that whole not judging, because I think as leaders, if Curtis shows up one way typically in move, and all of a sudden you show up in one of the other in quit, then I think a natural tendency of a leader is to say, well, what's happening? There's got to be something wrong with Curtis, as opposed to taking a step back and viewing it as it's just a different way he's showing up today, and we need to act differently in that moment.
Yeah, that's right. I was with a client yesterday talking about this very, very idea. One of the things that leaders need to do is suspend judgment and say, so-and-so is reacting this way. How does that help me lead them? It doesn't mean they're bad. I'm not trying to get everyone to be move, or I'm not trying to get everyone to be minimized. What I want to do is understand their starting point for the change. And as a leader, that means I'll interact with each of them differently based on what I see as the strengths they're bringing to this change. And the reaction means they have some needs they're bringing to the change. And so it helps me learn how to lead people better. And hopefully it helps individuals when they read the parable and see the reactions. Hopefully it helps them say, am I reacting or am I choosing my reaction based on what's going to create the most value? But in any of those circumstances, it starts to give us a little bit more insight and perhaps a little bit more of a sense of control. I can choose the part that I play in this.
Right. The whole sense of control is an interesting thing. So when talk a little bit about the model, right? Because those of us in this kind of work have seen a bazillion change models, and there's some, and a lot of them look the same, and a lot of you're talking about a lot of the same kinds of things. And so, talk a little bit about what inspired. You talk about the modified J curve kind of vibe, and so why that model, how you've created it, how you've languaged it. Give us a little insight there.
Yeah, that's. That evolved obviously over time. We were doing a lot of organizational work with the Who Moved My Cheese brand when I was partnered with Spencer. And I realized that while that brand is so compelling and helpful, it really focuses on a moment in time in the change. And that's where the individual saying, what in the world am I going to do with this? But we realized that organizations and leaders need quite a bit more than that. And so as we started to map it out, read about it, study about it, talk with clients about it, we realized there is this predictable pattern that takes place with all change, individual change, organizational change. It's funny when leaders tell me, that's not us, we're not doing that. I'm like, well, then you're naive because it happens every time. And of course, we say that very nicely, but the reality is there's this predictable pattern. And you're right. You go back and look, there's lots of examples of this, coming along in what we call the status quo. We're getting a level of result that's predictable. The status quo is a zone where we know what to expect. We feel comfortable. And at some point, a change gets introduced externally or internally. And when the change gets introduced, it sends us into a state of uncertainty. We call it the zone of disruption. And that impacts results. Results might be revenue or sales, but they could also be employee engagement. They could be attrition rates with employee turnover, or they could be some other metric, but there's always something impacted when we introduce a change. Results as an outcome of that start to decrease. And in this zone, we're looking to understand what's changing, why is it changing, and what does it really mean to me? And this is the zone where those reactions manifest themselves. I heard the change, this reaction comes out, or I choose a reaction, and I'm trying to get answers to those questions. The better a leader or an organization can do around helping get those answers, the faster we can move through that zone. But it takes a little time. We get to the point where we've got answers and we hit the point of decision, which is where Who Moved My Cheese is so brilliant. Because this says, I understand what's going on. I understand what's being asked of me. I choose to engage in it. And as you pass that point of decision, then we begin the work of the zone of adoption, which is moving into the change. Interestingly enough, this is the space where most changes fail, right?
Yes.
Finally
Yes.
get some energy. We start working on it. Our first idea didn't work. Let's go back to the way it was. And so we unwind because we lose patience or confidence. But we take some steps forward. We have some successes. We have some failures. We learn from it. And eventually, we're finding our way through the change, developing new ways of thinking, new ways of working, new ways of collaborating. And as that happens, we start to regain ground with the results we've lost, as well as we start to regain ground that the change is supposed to lead us to, because we wouldn't make a change just to pay the price of it. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations do that, but right, this dip, these two middle zones are the cost of change. Hopefully we work our way through it and we get back into what we call the zone of innovation, which is where all of the benefit from the change should really start to manifest itself. So there are some similarities in the modified J curve. The zones are quite unique to us. And the other thing that's really unique is it starts to become a tool where you can say, where am I? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I doing? It helps me know what zone I'm in. And then from there, we start to give people tools or resources that say, okay, now I know where I am. What can I do about it?
What I loved about it, right, is that the idea of it, being kind of the compass of where are I and having and because I do accountability, I'm a big fan of naming things. Like if you can name it, you can own it, and if you can own it, you can change it, right? So if I know I'm in disruption, and what you also did was assign behaviors. Right? Here's the key skill that you need to engage when you're in this zone. So
That's
knowing that when you're in adoption, it's all about persistence, right? And having that as kind of a guiding principle, I think is super helpful from a leadership perspective, because I do think they start feeling the risk. They feel the cost and they're looking at it and they are impatient. This isn't happening fast enough for us. Right? Because they're doing the change because they're afraid of some other risk around cost or efficiencies or it's some other business impact, right? That's the whole reason they're doing it. And maybe, I don't know, you can talk about this because it's from a coaching perspective, this is always the resistance to invest in systemic change, right? And it's not just because they'll say, we want to change the culture. And I'm like, well, then you've got to change some of your processes and systems. And right. It's not just people don't behave differently because they do.
Yeah,
How you get them to stick with it.
well, and it's funny because you get leaders that get into that space and they hit the panic button, they hit the work harder button, all the things that do the exact opposite of what's really needed, because then everybody feels pressurized. And change inherently creates some pressure, right? As we're looking to get new results, engage in new behaviors, develop new workflows, whatever the journey is, it inevitably means we're taking on new things. So one of the recommendations I give to leaders is to say, start by identifying a stop doing list. What are we going to give people permission to stop doing? Legacy behaviors, legacy workflow. I was in a conversation with some colleagues a week ago. I said, so what are we doing that we did 10 years ago and we don't know why we're doing it, right? It's those kind of things. Stop doing it. Free up space, capacity, time for creativity to give everyone the energy. So that's one thing. Another thing you can do with leaders is we can be more intentional around what is the cost we expect and what's the outcome that we think will offset all of this cost. And if the vision and the potential is compelling enough, then it gives us a lot of resolve in the middle two zones to keep working through it. And then I suppose the other thing I would add is leaders need to stay engaged rather than declare the change and go back to their ivory tower. If they'll stay engaged and move from monologue about the change to dialogue, then they can understand where energy, enthusiasm, momentum, and resource is diminishing, and they need to step in and play a part to help the change be successful.
Mm. One of the things that I run into a lot, and I'm sure Jen does as well, Curtis, is that there's so much change going on, right? So, this is perfect world, right? There's one change happening. We can follow our people through the change curve and dialogue with them. But the reality is there's a bit of a shiny object thing happening, right? Where we got to do this and we have to do that, or we didn't know about that, but we're going to bring it in. So how do leaders manage people through all of this layers and layers of change things that are happening at one time?
Well, this represents the experience of all of our people. So they have this experience bias that says, oh my goodness, here's another one. The last one didn't stick. And that's why you get so much of wait and resist, because of this experience bias. There, of course, are lots of demands that businesses are faced with. So I'm not here to say just pick one change at a time. Obviously, that would be the perfect world, as you said, Sandi. But what I would say is we have a lot of data that says if we engage in 1 to 2 changes, we can execute on them with excellence. If we engage in 3 to 5, we can execute on them. And if we engage in 5 or more simultaneously, none of them will happen. So I think this is where leaders need to be confronting reality and say, okay, how do we prioritize and how do we look at the cost versus the return? I get that all of that might feel academic, but it is quite practical as I've worked with organizations. Those leaders that can narrow the focus will find that they can apply the tools, develop the skills and the competency, and actually have change show up as a muscle that the organization develops and strengthens. And so then what happens? Well, that dip gets shallower and shorter. And so the speed with which you can attack a change improves. And so you find that you can actually get to a point where you move faster and more effectively through them if you're dealing with 1 to 5 at any one time. The other point I would just offer leaders is sometimes they try and take the change curve, they try and do some advanced calculus and come up with one single change curve for all of those changes. It just doesn't work that way. Pick a change, identify where that individual is, where the team is, and take a snapshot of the change against the change model, but look at it separately for a different change. There is no way to try and amalgamate them all into one. You have to deal with each one, because on one change, Curtis might be super energized. I feel like I'm prepared for it. I feel like I know what we're doing. And on 2 others, I might be just completely uncertain. So you've got to frame each one as its own thing.
Yeah, I like those numbers. Sorry, Jen. I like the numbers because we're finding, we've talked about this many times, organizations are taking on so many everything's a priority, that they're not making judgment calls on what should be a priority versus everything being a priority. So I think that's a strong takeaway in terms of
Isn't there a line from The Incredibles that says, when everything's important, nothing's important? Right? It's just, it's funny, we joked about it, but it's so true. And we lose track of that.
Well, right. And leaders, as a job, your job as a leader is to create focus, right? Strategies around focus and for crying out loud, the tight connection between change and strategy but as you were talking, I love the front end of the book, where it really is where you talk about change as a people thing, and you talk about mindsets, and you set all that up first, because I do think how you think about it is how you show up in it. So talk a little bit about how you got to the mindsets and the people side of it.
Yeah, this was one of the guiding principles early on. And part of it came from the idea that there are a lot of consultancy firms that will come in and help you with change, and you end up with a binder that's just a series of checklists. And I had an allergic reaction to that. At FranklinCovey, we have two grand assertions. The potential for greatness lies within everyone, and that you can actually do something to unlock that greatness. So as I translate that into our change thinking, we realized if organizations hire people that are skilled at what they do and they have expertise in the business, it would be highly arrogant on my part to walk in and say, I'm going to give you a checklist of what you should do. So we said, let's back up and assume that the people are capable, competent, invested. Then what do we need to do? We need to find a way to give them a framework that helps them understand where they are and give them tools to progress along the framework, and then unleash them to be the experts in the project plan and the resource. What am I going to add if I go into a publishing company and tell them how to be a better publisher? I'm not. What if I go into a technology company and tell them how to do better software? I don't know. But what I do know is that talented humans unleashed can figure that part out. So how do we unleash the people? And that became one of the building blocks for how we thought about and how we've designed our solution. That doesn't mean project management is not an essential and important part of change. It just means I don't think you need that expertise externally. You can unleash your people and they'll do that part.
Yeah. Yeah. The workforce is your solution, not your problem.
That's right.
Yes. Yes. I love it. And I'm a big fan of a people first approach. I'm a big fan of, and I think we underestimate what our people are capable of. And we get so caught up in the change itself, the business aspect, the list of actions, and that we're so mindful of that. We forget that none of that matters unless people are dealing with how they're feeling about it, dealing with their willingness, their advocacy, how we're moving them through those feelings. And I think that's always the part people just want to ignore. Like, if I just keep getting clear expectations and deadlines, you'll eventually just get on board. And that's just not how it works. That's
right. All we get is compliance. And what we really want is engagement, right? We want an engaged, creatively excited group. And if they feel like we're moving them to the point where they can contribute to the change, they may not set the strategy, so be it, right? There are a few that get that privilege. But if the strategy is clearly communicated and it connects to where we're going and purpose and storytelling, and then we allow the team to engage and help design, engagement goes up, creativity goes up, and quality of outcome goes way up as well.
Yeah. You mentioned capacity earlier, and that's a big thing right now. Everybody's saying we don't have enough capacity. And so how do you create the capacity to have those conversations? Because it takes time, right? To engage with people, to have those conversations, to truly meet them where they are, to give them the tools that they need where they are. But we don't have time. Leaders don't have time, or so we say.
Oh, I think there's a real cold, hard reality to that. We're asking people to do more with less. And it's a trend that continues, right? Gone are the days of most managers just being managed, right? They're player coaches. They're doing lots of additional work. So I don't want to marginalize or trivialize that equation of resource capacity. It's real. So I just want to acknowledge, I get that. The stop doing list is an important thing. It's not the only thing, but I am coming back to it because leaders need to do that for frontline employees, but senior leaders need to help their mid-level and first-level leaders get that same permission. And that is a discussion that needs to happen to say, how are we going to free up capacity here? I don't think it's reasonable for us to keep just expecting and believing that everybody can just work more. All we get there is burnout and lower productivity. So that is one component to it that says, well, what are we going to stop doing? And that's a courageous conversation. If your boss isn't bringing that conversation to you, That is a courageous conversation to have. But I think it's
Yeah.
one to put forward that says, okay, I am all in on the change. Here's
Yeah.
the constraints I'm up against, and here's my recommendation on the stop doing this. That's one. Number two, I do think from a strategic point of view, making decisions around the actual cost of change and the benefits so we limit the number of changes that are simultaneously happening is a second one. And then the third one is a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. But I think if we work through change with a tool set where we move from thinking, oh, here's another change, right? I've run a lot of research on this, and 88% of employees think the change will make things worse for them. 72% think it's going to make it worse for the company. That's all based on historical experience and evidence. So the chicken and egg dilemma is really this idea of, well, if we could get better at it and we could move faster through it and we could develop change competency, then we have more capacity, right? We actually increase capacity. And so in that chicken and egg situation, I think the person that has the responsibility to go first with that mindset is the leader. The person with the most responsibility, the person with the most experience, has the obligation to go first. And if they'll go first and say, all right, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to try and develop this change capability, here's what I'm doing, I think you can invite people in to take that journey with you and develop the muscle, the capability, and that will increase the effectiveness and the efficiency with which you move through change. It's not
Right.
easy, right? I'm
It's
not
it's
giving you a
not.
magic wand. I'm saying it's going to be 20% better next time, but 20% better is better than not improving.
Heck of a deal. Yeah. So one last thing I want to kind of cover off, because my favorite character is always resist. Because there's so many of them, right? We can
Yep.
cast that all day long. Um, and specifically when you have large organizations and you're in that middle layer, right? The leaders operate on almost a different reality and they get all drunk on their plan and they're like, yes, we know what we're going to do, right? And they all feel they're captaining their own little boats in their areas of the business. And then you get to that middle layer and that ability to get to the core of the organization and the bulk of the people. Talk a little bit about how you think about that and how this model can work and help leaders in all places, right?
Yeah. Well, let me start with resist. One of the things about resist I love is resist is thought of questions that leaders probably haven't thought of. So I do want to acknowledge there's real value there. And it's worth being open-minded to hear the questions that come from resist in that zone of disruption. There is real value. And what have we forgot? What have we overlooked? What are you thinking? And some of those may be non-issues, but some of them may be legitimate. So let's recognize the power of resist. To the question you're asking about, how do you get alignment from the top to the bottom? So the assumption in the question is that we're working from an executive-led change. Sometimes change happens in other places, but if we focus on executive announcement, we're leading the change. There's a tool that we've created that I think really helps here. It's called a case for change. Case for change is really 2/3 storytelling, 1/3 practical from to. What are we asking you to move from and to? The storytelling is the vision. Hey, we're going to introduce this change. Here's what we see in the marketplace. Here's what we see from competitors. Here's what we see from product. Whatever it is that says to the leaders, we see the need for a change. Tell the story of why and tell the story of where we think this will take us. And we believe that making this change can lead us to this outcome. And this is exciting. This is where it creates opportunity for the organization. This is where it can create opportunity for our people. And then you get to the part that says, so what do we mean? We're asking the organization to move from this to this, from being a transactional this to a solution this, from this mindset to this mindset. So an executive case for change, an organizational case for change, handed to the next level of leaders and say, what questions do you have? Now take this case for change and work with your teams and identify how your team's case for change works in conjunction with this. And a lot of organizations, if you do that 2 or 3 levels, you suddenly start to get right to the front line, and you have this cascading case for change where you create alignment. But as you move further down, you get into storytelling for leaders, and you get into really where the rubber meets the road. All right, on our team, we are moving from this to this. And it's really an exciting thing because it creates dialogue up and down the organization. The case for change is a one-pager. It's not like we're writing a big book. And it gives me as a leader a chance to check back with my leader and say, are we aligned? And to talk to my team and say, we've defined our own from to statements. We're part of this. We're helping design the change at our team level. So it creates feedback, dialogue, and alignment and engagement with the front line if we go through that process.
Fantastic. I love it. I love a from to experience. It's so empowering because I got to put in, so now I can solve my own problem on this.
That's right.
Yeah. Sandi, you got additional. I have one more question, but I don't know if you have another one before we.
No, I was just thinking about that whole from to experience. I think it's brilliant because that we talk about misalignment and needing alignment. And that's one way for teams below to say, where does my puzzle piece fit? And so I think that's a really strong case for creating that story, that from to experience at different levels, because I think that's where it loses it, right? It's often comes from a level, whether it's here or here, but we don't engage, we tell.
That's right. If we monologue, if we stand up in a town hall and declare the change, and then we disappear, we haven't given any chance for the next levels of leaders to be involved in the dialogue or to engage or to create the alignment. And so everybody's guessing or frustrated, and you don't build any momentum. And I think it's worth pointing out, you've both alluded to it. All of the change tools we have are this simple. They're meant to be easy. They're meant to have a leader that manages a call center team of 20 people that's never led change before. Pull it out and read it, and it will create value. And that's by design. We're not trying to make it complex. We're trying to make it work. And as we've developed these tools, we've tested them with real people in real businesses. We haven't just worked on it in a lab where we've thought up these crazy ideas. These have been put
Well, and I think because you're people focused on this, right? So you're really looking at it from how people experience it, which helps in that practicality and that tacticality of what you're offering. And in talking through your from to it, it's occurring to me that when I talk through change, people don't, the to isn't the inspiration. It's the clarity, here's the horizon, but it's the from that gets people activated, because in coaching, we call it agitating the discontent. This is the stuff we're tired of. This is the stuff that no longer serves us. This is the stuff we're all frustrated about, so that when we can start to see, we can get away from this, and everyone's willing to do and understand what that is, and we do that together, our willingness to be different, see different, that's where those mindset shifts occur, and where you stop being resist and you start being a little bit more toward move, which
That's
is right. The excellence in the tactical.
Yep.
So the last kind of question I had for you is based on, because the book came out when, so right, the full title, Change, How to Turn Uncertainty into Opportunity, came out in
1 year ago. We're just getting ready to launch it in softback, paperback. It's been out in hardback, so we're on the 1 year anniversary at the end of this month.
Fantastic. So it's been out there. This is work you guys have been doing for a really long time. So if you could go back and add another chapter or section to the book, what's it going to be about and why?
Oh, I've already got a whole nother book on it.
Do tell.
Yeah. So there is a set of 5 leadership capabilities or competencies that really belong. We can list 30 great leadership skills, but there are 5 of particular importance when it comes to leading change: vision, communication, alignment, engagement, and accountability. those have particular application when it comes to leading change. And so I would love to add, a companion volume to this that talks about leaders and each of those 5 capabilities. What's fascinating is those 5 capabilities apply in all 4 zones, a little bit differently in each zone, but they're relevant in all 4 of the zones. So those leadership skills have a place to get used all the way along the journey. And I am looking forward to pulling that together. I've already got it outlined because it's the next step.
Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing that. And so obviously you can buy Curtis's book on all of the places you buy books, no doubt. Yes, here's what it looks like if you're watching us on YouTube.
Yeah.
And Curtis, thanks so much for taking the time to share all this information. Great read, great toolkit, and we highly recommend. 2 thumbs up.
Thank you. Great to talk with both of you today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Curtis. And to all of our listeners, leave your comments. Let us know what else you'd like to hear from us. We're here to serve you.
Yeah, share the link with all your leader friends who are in the middle of a change and need some help. All right, that's it for us. See you next time.
Thank you so much for listening. You can check out Sandi's website at satoriconsultinginc.ca. That's SATORI consultinginc.ca. And visit Jen's website at own-up.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.